What if Ned Stark raised Daenerys Targaryen, not in exile, not across the narrow sea, in the care of a bitter brother and the charity of magisters with agendas, not running from city to city, begging for armies, selling her brother's crown and then her brother, learning the world through the lens of what had been taken from her, in Winterfell, at the same table where his own children ate, in the same castle where his bastard, the boy who was not his bastard, who was his sister's son, who was the other secret Ned carried like a stone behind his ribs, grew up learning the sword and the cold and the specific weight of being a Stark in everything but name. 2 Targaryen children, under one roof, neither of them knowing what the other was, neither of them knowing what they were, raised by a man who could not tell them the truth because the truth would kill them, and who could not stop raising them because the alternative was what had happened to Rhaenys and Aegon, the blood on the floor of the Red Keep, the small bodies wrapped in Lannister cloaks, and Ned Stark would die before he let that happen again. He nearly did die, several times. The secret was a living thing that grew inside the walls of Winterfell, fed by every year that passed and every lie that maintained it. And the secret had teeth. This is the story of what those teeth produced. Dragonstone. The Storm. 284 C. The Targaryen fleet burned in the harbour while Queen Rhaella died upstairs. This was the specific cruelty of Dragonstone in the last days of the dynasty. The storm that destroyed the fleet and the birth that destroyed the queen happening simultaneously, as if the gods wanted to make sure the Targaryens understood that everything was being taken from them at once. Ned arrived before Stannis. This was the thing that changed everything. 3 days. Stannis was 3 days behind him. 3 days of sailing around the hook of Massey's Point. 3 days of the methodical Stannis approach that prioritized doing things correctly over doing them quickly. Ned had ridden hard down the King's Road with 20 men because he'd heard the Queen was in labour and because the memory of Elia's children, the small bodies, the blood, Tywin Lannister's gift to Robert wrapped in crimson, was 3 days old in his mind and he could still smell it. He found Dragonstone in chaos. The garrison was fragmenting. Half had already deserted, taken fishing boats across the strait, disappeared into the Crownlands, shed their dragon sigils and become nobody because nobody was safer than Targaryen loyalist in Robert Baratheon's new kingdom. The other half were arguing about what to do with the children. Viserys, 7 years old and already wearing the specific expression of a boy who understood that the world had turned against his family and who had decided to be angry about it rather than afraid. And the newborn, Daenerys, born in the storm. Her mother dead. The maester who delivered her standing in the great hall with the infant in his arms and the expression of a man who had run out of plans. Ned came through the gates with Snow still in his cloak. Absurd. Dragonstone wasn't cold enough for Snow, but he'd ridden so fast from the north that the northern weather was still on him. And found the Maester, and the baby, and the boy, and the problem. The fleet is gone, the Maester said. His name was Cresson. Ned would remember this. The Queen is dead. Stannis Baratheon is 3 days behind me. Then these children have 3 days. Ned looked at the baby, hours old. Purple eyes, Targaryen eyes, unmistakable. The colour that had ruled Westeros for 3 centuries, and that was now, in this specific infant, the colour that would get her killed. He looked at Viserys. The boy looked back with the fury of a 7-year-old who had learned the word usurper and was applying it to everyone in the room. Robert will want them dead, Cresson said, not as an accusation, as a fact. The way Maesters presented facts, clean, without ornament, expecting the listener to handle the implications. I know what Robert will want. Sir Willem Darry is preparing a ship for both children across the narrow sea, He can... No. Ned said it before the thought was fully formed, the word arriving ahead of the reasoning like an arrow ahead of the bowstring. Then the reasoning came. Rhaenys's body on the floor of the nursery. The stab wounds. 20 stab wounds on a 3-year-old child because Gregor Clegane didn't believe in half measures. Baby Aegon's skull against the wall. The sound that Ned imagined because he hadn't been there to hear it. The sound that lived in his head because the knot. Hearing was worse than the hearing would have been. Viserys goes with Darry, Ned said. Across the sea. He's 7. He's old enough to be recognized. He's old enough that Robert will look for him, and the looking will not stop. And the girl? Ned looked at the baby. The baby looked at nothing. Newborns looked at nothing. The unfocused, unfinished gaze of a creature that hadn't learned yet that there were things worth seeing. She was small and red, and breathing in the specific, determined way that newborns breathed, as if breathing was a project she had just undertaken and was committed to. I'll take her. Cressen's face went through several things. Lord Stark, I have a bastard son at Winterfell. A bastard daughter won't raise questions that aren't already being asked. He was building the logic as he spoke, the specific Ned Stark process of constructing a moral architecture in real time, fitting the pieces together by talking them through. She's an infant. She has no identifying marks except the eyes, and the eyes, purple eyes, happen in dawn, in the free cities. They're unusual, but they're not proof. I'll say her mother was someone from the campaign. The same lie I tell about Jon. Robert. Robert won't question a second bastard. Robert has bastards in every port and half the castles in the south. A man who sires bastards everywhere doesn't question his best friend having 2. Lady Stark. Ned's jaw tightened. I'll manage Catelyn. Those 3 words. I'll manage Catelyn. Ned Stark at his most self-deceiving. The belief that the woman he had married 3 months ago, who was already managing the existence of one child she believed he'd fathered on another woman, would absorb a second without the weight of it breaking something. Cressen looked at him with the expression of a man who had served 3 kings and who recognized a decision that was going to cost more than the person making it understood. She'll need a wet nurse. A name. Dany, Ned said. Short for something. A Dornish name. Common enough. Dany is not a Dornish name. It's a name. That's what she needs. Cressen wrapped the baby, handed her to Ned. The transfer was careful. Cressen was a maester. He knew how to handle infants, and Ned was a lord who had held his own son exactly once and had been terrified both times. Ned took her. He rode north with a baby in his saddlebag and a 20-man escort that he swore to silence, and a lie that was already growing, already developing the specific weight and texture of a deception that would require maintenance every day for the rest of his life. He had another one at home. Jon Snow, Lyanna's son, the boy he was already lying about. 2 Targaryen children. 1 castle. 1 lie. Doubled. He rode. Winterfell. Catelyn, 284. Catelyn Tully had been married to Ned Stark for 4 months when he came home from the war with 2 bastards. The first, the boy, Jon, she had prepared for, or tried to. The letter had come ahead of Ned. I'm bringing a child home. He's mine. I'll explain when I arrive. The explanation, when it arrived, was not an explanation. It was a wall. Ned said, He's mine. Catelyn asked, Whose? Ned said, He's mine. Again, with the specific stark finality that meant the conversation was over whether or not the other person agreed. She had absorbed this. Not gracefully. There was no graceful way to absorb the news that your husband of 4 months had fathered a child on another woman during the war, that you'd been waiting out at River Run with his son in your belly. But she absorbed it. She was Catelyn Tully. She absorbed difficult things the way the Riverlands absorbed floods, by letting the water rise and holding and not drowning. Then Ned came through the gate with a second child, a girl, infant, purple eyes. Catelyn stood in the courtyard of Winterfell with Robb, her son, 3 months old, the child she carried alone while Ned was at war, in her arms, and she watched her husband dismount with a baby girl, and the expression of a man who knew he was about to destroy something and was doing it anyway, because the alternative was worse. No. She said it before he could speak. One word, delivered with the full weight of a woman who had reached the limit of what she was willing to accept, and who was communicating the limit clearly. Cat, you brought one child home. I accepted that. I don't understand it and I hate it, but I accepted it. You are not bringing a second. She has nowhere else to go. She has a mother, somewhere. Give her back. Her mother is dead. Catelyn's face shifted, not softening, recalibrating. The Tully pragmatism, which was different from Tully warmth, engaging beneath the fury. Dead. In the south, during the war, the mother is dead and the child is here, and I need you to... Need me to what? Her voice was quiet in the way that Catelyn's voice went quiet when the volume would have been easier, and she was choosing the harder thing. Need me to raise another woman's child? Need me to explain to your bannerman why the Lord of Winterfell has 2 bastards from 2 different mothers from one war? Need me to look at the servants and the lords and the people of this castle and carry the... She stopped. Robb was fussing. She adjusted him. The maternal instinct and the marital fury occupying the same body and not blending. Her name is Dany, Ned said. I don't care what her name is. Cat. He stepped forward. Not touching her. Ned had the intelligence not to touch her right now. I know what I'm asking. I know what it costs. I am asking you to do this because I cannot explain why, and the not explaining is going to be the hardest part. And I need you to trust that there is a reason I can't tell you, and that the reason is... He stopped. His face was Ned's face at its most naked. The honor and the pain and the specific, stark inability to lie well enough to make the lying painless. I need you to trust me. You're asking me to trust you while you won't tell me the truth. Yes. That's not trust, Ned. That's faith. And I'm running out. They stood in the courtyard. Winterfell around them. The grey walls, the steam from the hot springs, the ancient castle that was going to be the stage for this deception for the next 15 years. 2 children wailing. Ned's men pretending not to hear. The September wind cutting through the yard with the particular indifference of weather that doesn't care about human problems. Catelyn took the baby. Not gently. Not with warmth. With the competent efficiency of a woman who was going to do this thing she hated, because letting an infant die of neglect was not within her moral architecture, and who was going to make sure Ned understood that the doing was not the same as the accepting. She'll need a wet nurse. I'll arrange it. You'll arrange nothing regarding this child. I'll feed her and house her and make sure she lives, and that is the extent of what I'm willing to do, and you will not ask me for more. She turned, walked inside. Robb in one arm, Dany in the other. 2 babies who had nothing to do with each other and who were going to grow up in the same castle with the same last name, or no last name, and the specific charged distance of being children of the same father who was not actually the father of either of them. Ned stood in the courtyard. He thought, 2 secrets now. He thought, Jon is Lyanna's son. Dany is Rhaella's daughter. They are Targaryen cousins, and they are in the same castle. And if Robert finds out about either of them, I am dead, and they are dead, and everyone I love is dead. He thought, I have to do this. He went inside. The lie settled in. The way lies settled. Not with a snap, but with a slow subsidence, the ground beneath the house shifting millimetre by millimetre, until the house was standing on something that wasn't quite solid, and everyone inside had adjusted to the tilt. Winterfell. The Children. 284-296 AC. The children grew up together. Not equally. This was the first thing. The not equally. Robb was the heir. Sansa, born a year after Robb, was the eldest daughter. Arya, Bran, Rickon, they came in their order, each one legitimate, each one Stark, each one occupying their designated place in the architecture of a great house. Jon and Dany were the others. Not said aloud, not often, but present in the seating at dinner where Jon and Dany sat at the side table rather than the main. In the forms of address, where the servants called them Jon and Dany rather than my lord and my lady. In the 1,000 small calibrations of a household that drew a line between its true-born children and its lord's acknowledged mistakes, and that communicated the line through texture rather than declaration. Jon handled this by going inward. He was a quiet boy, serious, watchful, the kind of child who observed a room before entering it and who read the social terrain the way his father read military terrain, systematically, looking for threats. He trained hard. He studied hard. He developed the specific competence of a child who understood, without being told, that his place in the household was contingent on being useful, and who made himself useful with the concentrated determination of someone building a case for their own existence. Dany handled it differently. Dany was loud. Not loud in the brash way, not Arya's loudness, which was physical and confrontational and delighted in its own disruption. Dany was loud in the way of a child who refused to accept the side table, who asked why when the seating was arranged, who argued when she was told, that's where you sit, who pushed against the architecture of the household with the instinctive fury of someone who knew, without having the language for it, that the architecture was wrong. Catelyn found this exhausting. Catelyn had made her bargain with Ned. She would raise the girl, house the girl, keep the girl alive. She had not bargained for a child who questioned every boundary. Jon was manageable. Jon accepted his position with the Stark stoicism that made Catelyn simultaneously guilty and relieved. Dany did not accept. Dany pushed. Why can't I sit with Sansa? This was Dany at 6, standing in the great hall before dinner with the expression of a child who had identified an injustice and intended to address it. She was small for 6, small in general, the Targaryen frame that would develop into something willowy and striking, but that at 6 was just small, a girl who looked younger than she was and who spoke older than she looked. Catelyn said, because the high table is for family. I live here. You live here? You are not. Catelyn stopped herself. The sentence she'd been about to say, you are not family, sat in her mouth like a coal, and she couldn't spit it out, and she couldn't swallow it, and the hesitation was itself a kind of answer. Dany looked at her. 6 years old. Purple eyes. The eyes that Ned had said could pass for Dornish, that could be explained away as an unusual colour from an unusual mother, and that Catelyn saw every morning and every evening, and that she could not look at without the specific grinding awareness that these eyes did not belong to a Dornish camp follower's child, that these eyes were something else, something Ned refused to explain, something that lived in the space between what he'd told her and what was true. Jon sits at the side table, Catelyn said. You sit at the side table. That's how it is. Dany sat at the side table. She sat beside Jon, who was 8, and who had already made his peace with the side table, and who looked at Dany's fury the way he looked at most things, observing, filing, not commenting. "It's not fair," Dany said to him. "I know. Don't you care?" "I care." He ate his dinner. Caring doesn't change where the table is. It should. Yeah. He looked at her. 8 years old. Grey eyes, the stark colouring that was so complete you'd never guess what he actually was. It should. They were allies after that. Not by declaration, by the specific gravity of 2 children who occupied the same position in a household, and who had no one else who understood that position. They ate together. They played together. They occupied the corners of Winterfell that the true-born children didn't need, the broken tower, the old kitchens, the parts of the castle that were too cold or too drafty, or too far from the centre for anyone to claim. Dany followed Jon to the training yard. This was not expected and not encouraged. Girls in the north trained occasionally. Bear Island produced fighters. The mountain clans had their own customs. But Winterfell's training yard was Stark territory, Robb's domain, and a girl at the side table following the bastard brother into the yard was a disruption that Sir Roderick did not appreciate. Dany didn't train. She watched. She sat on the wall above the yard, and she watched Jon spar with Robb, watched the footwork and the timing and the way bodies moved when they were trying to hit each other, and she catalogued it the way Jon catalogued rooms, systematically, looking for patterns. She couldn't articulate what she was looking for. She didn't have the vocabulary. But something in the watching satisfied something in her that she didn't have a name for. A hunger that was not physical and not intellectual, but somewhere else. Somewhere deeper, in the blood maybe, in the thing she was that nobody had told her about. Ned noticed. He noticed Dany watching the yard the way he noticed everything about Jon and Dany, with the heightened, anxious attention of a man who knew what they were and who was constantly scanning for signs that they were becoming it. Signs that the blood was showing. Signs that the secret was leaking through the surface of the lie. Purple eyes watching steel. He thought, Targaryen. He put the thought away. He put it away every day. Every day it came back. The purple eyes, the silver blonde hair that Dany wore braided in northern style but that caught the light wrong. Not blonde the way Lannister children were blonde, but silver. The metallic pale that was Targaryen, and only Targaryen, and that Ned told himself could be Lysin, could be free cities, could be anything. It could not be anything. It was Targaryen. Everyone who looked at Dany saw an unusual child with unusual colouring and an unusual fire in her, and they thought, interesting. Ned looked at Dany and thought, bomb. The dreams started when she was 8. The dreams. 292 AC. She came to Ned's solar in the middle of the night, barefoot, still in her shift, her hair loose, silver in the candlelight, silver in any light, the colour that Ned couldn't explain away, no matter how many times he said, Lysine. She was shaking, not from cold. Winterfell was heated by hot springs. The castle was never truly cold. From something else. I had a dream. Ned was at his desk. He was always at his desk. The specific insomnia of a man carrying too many secrets and managing the carrying through work, through the endless processing of ledgers and letters, and the administrative machinery of lordship that gave his hands something to do while his mind circled the things it couldn't solve. Come sit. She sat, in the chair across from him. Small, 8. The shift too big for her, because her growth was Targaryen slow, and the clothes were cut for northern children who grew faster. Tell me. There were eggs. 3 eggs. They were stone, no. They looked like stone, but they weren't. They were warm. I could feel them. Here. She put her hand on her chest. Inside. The warmth was inside me, not outside. Ned's hand, which had been holding a quill, went still. And there was fire. But it wasn't. It didn't hurt. The fire was around me and I wasn't burning. She searched for the word. 8 years old. Vocabulary insufficient for what the dream was trying to tell her. Standing in it. Like standing in water. Dreams are just dreams, Danny. This wasn't a dream. She said it with the absolute certainty of a child who knew the difference between the things her mind produced at night and the things that were produced for her from somewhere else. Someone was showing me. Ned set down the quill. Carefully. The way you set things down when your hands wanted to shake and you were preventing it. Who was showing you? I don't know. Something big. Old. Under the ground, I think. Or in the walls. She looked at him with the purple eyes that he couldn't explain away. It wasn't scary. It was like someone telling me something they'd been wanting to tell me for a long time. Ned looked at this child. This Targaryen child, daughter of Aerys and Rhaella, sister of the prince who'd taken his sister, niece of the king who'd burned his father, sitting in his solar at midnight, telling him about dragon dreams, and not knowing that the dreams had a name and a history and a lineage that ran back 300 years to the doom of Valyria. He said, "Go back to bed." But it was a dream. Dreams don't mean anything. Go back to bed. She went, reluctantly. At the door, she turned back. Jon has dreams too. Ned went cold. He told me. Not the same kind. He dreams about wolves, a white wolf. He says it's waiting for him. Go to bed, Danny. She left. Ned sat in his solar. He thought, dragon dreams. She's having dragon dreams. 8 years old, and the blood is doing what the blood does. What Targaryen blood has done for 300 years. Calling to the fire the way Stark blood calls to the cold. The way his own children dream of wolves, and Jon dreams of a wolf he hasn't met yet. He thought, and she told me about Jon's dreams. Which means they talk about this. Which means the two of them, the two Targaryen children in his house who don't know they're Targaryen, are sharing the experience of being something they can't name and finding each other in the sharing. He thought, this is going to get worse. He was right. Dany and Jon. What grew between them? 292-298 AC. The alliance between them was not friendship. Not exactly. Friendship required equality, and Jon and Dany were not equal in the household. Jon was older, male, training for a role even if the role was unclear. Dany was younger, female, training for nothing because nobody had figured out what a bastard daughter in the north was supposed to train for. They occupied the same rung on the same ladder, but the ladder was leaning against different walls. What they had was closer to kinship. Not the kinship they didn't know about. The literal Targaryen blood that connected them through a dynasty neither of them had ever been told they belonged to. A different kinship. The kinship of excluded children who had found each other in the exclusion, and who maintained the finding with the fierce loyalty of people who understood that losing each other meant being alone. Jon taught Dany to shoot. Not officially. Sir Roderick would have objected. Catelyn would have objected. The entire structure of what girls were allowed to do in Winterfell would have objected. Jon taught her in the mornings, before the yard opened, when the light was grey, and the castle was still wrapped in the specific heavy sleep of a household that rose late in winter. They used a bow that Jon had outgrown. Dany was small enough that the draw weight was right for her, and her hands, small, quick, the Targaryen hands that looked like they should break and didn't, adapted to the string with a speed that surprised both of them. "You're good at this," Jon said after the first week. "I'm good at things that involve hitting what I'm aiming at." "That's most things, actually. Then I should be good at most things." Jon looked at her. 10 years old, hair braided back, purple eyes narrowed at the target. The specific concentration of a child who had found a channel for something that had been looking for a channel. Don't let Sir Roderick see. Sir Roderick can mind his own targets. This was Dany. The refusal to accommodate, the push against every boundary that Jon had learned to accept. Where Jon went inward, absorbing the household's hierarchy, finding his place within it, building competence inside the constraints, Dany went outward, pushed, questioned, refused to sit at the side table without asking why, refused to be excluded from the yard without arguing, refused the architecture of her own marginalization with the instinctive fury that Catelyn found exhausting and that Ned found terrifying because the fury was the blood. The fury was Targaryen, not the heiress fury, not the madness, not the burning, not the paranoid, destructive rage of a king who heard enemies in the fire. Dany's fury was different. It was the fury of someone who saw injustice and refused to accept it, who looked at a system that told her she was less and said no with every piece of herself, every morning without tiring. Ned watched this and thought, that's her mother. Rhaella was like that, before the end, before Aerys broke her down. Rhaella pushed. Ned watched this and thought, that's going to be a problem. The problem arrived when Dany was 12. The fire, 296 AC. Well, the kitchen fire should have killed her. The details were mundane. A grease spill, a flame jumping, the specific chain of small failures that turned a minor accident into a catastrophe. The kitchen hearth at Winterfell was massive, built for cooking for a castle of 500, and when the grease caught, the flame went vertical, a column of fire that reached the rafters and set the wooden beams above the hearth smoking. 3 kitchen servants were burned. Minor burns. Painful, but not fatal. The kind that healed in weeks and left scars that lasted years. Dany was in the kitchen when it happened. She was there because the kitchen was one of her places, the corners of Winterfell that the trueborn children didn't claim, the spaces where a bastard girl could exist without the constant reminder of her bastardness. She was sitting on a bench near the hearth, eating a stolen honey cake, when the grease caught and the fire went up and the heat hit her. The servants ran. Dany didn't run. She didn't run because, and she would tell Jon this later, sitting on the broken tower in the cold, her voice strange and careful. She didn't want to. The fire was hot, and the servants were screaming, and every instinct in the human animal said, move, run, get away from the thing that burns. And Dany's instinct said something else. Her instinct said, stay. She stood in the edge of the fire. The flame touched her shift, and the shift burned, but the skin beneath the shift did not. This lasted 4 seconds. 4 seconds that Dany would remember for the rest of her life, and that would rearrange everything she understood about herself. 4 seconds where the fire was around her, and she was not burning, and the heat was not pain, but something else. Something familiar. Something she recognized from the dreams. The warmth inside the chest. The standing in fire like standing in water. Then Jory Cassell pulled her out. He grabbed her arm and hauled her back, and she stumbled free of the flames, and the moment was over, and she was standing in the kitchen in a burned shift with Jory's hand on her arm and the servants staring at her, and the specific silence of people who had seen something they didn't understand and were deciding what to do with the seeing. Her skin was unmarked. Jory looked at her arm where he'd grabbed her, looked at the burned shift, looked at the skin beneath it. You're not... I'm fine. Dany pulled her arm away. I'm fine. She wasn't fine. She was 12 years old, and she had just stood in fire without burning, and the implications of this were so enormous that her 12-year-old mind couldn't hold them and was trying to shrink them into something manageable and failing. She went to Jon. She found him in the broken tower. Their place. The place they went when the conversation was too big for anywhere else. He was cleaning a practice sword. which was what Jon did when he needed his hands occupied while his mind worked. I stood in the fire. Jon set down the sword. In the kitchen. The grease fire. I stood in it. Jon, it didn't burn me. Dany, my shift burned. My hair didn't. My skin didn't. I felt it. The heat. But it wasn't heat. It was... She shook her head. I don't know what it was. It was like the dreams. The same feeling. Jon looked at her. 14 years old. Grey eyes. The face that would make girls in the north whisper in a few years. He looked at Dany the way he looked at everything. Assessing, filing, the watchful processing of a boy who had learned to analyze before reacting because reacting got you hurt. Did anyone see? Jory. Some kitchen people. What did Jory say? He didn't say anything. He looked scared. Dany. Jon's voice went low. You need to talk to Father. Father doesn't. Father knows something. He's always known something. The way he looks at you. At both of us. It's not the way you look at your bastard children. It's the way you look at something you're protecting. Jon held her gaze. Talk to Father. Dany went to Ned. She found him in the Godswood. At the Heart Tree. The place Ned went when he needed the old gods, and the old silence and the specific clarity that came from sitting in a place that had been sacred for 8,000 years, and that didn't care about the problems of the people who sat in it. She told him about the fire. Ned's face went through the stages. Shock, then fear, then the specific grim acknowledgement of a man who had been waiting for this moment for 12 years, and who had hoped it wouldn't come, and who knew it would. Sit down, he said. She sat on the moss beside the pool. The Hearttree's face watched them both with the fixed expression that Hearttrees had. The red eyes, the frozen scream, the thing that was either anguish or ecstasy or both. You didn't burn, Ned said. No. And the dreams. They haven't stopped. They've gotten more, louder. She held his gaze. What am I? The question. The one Ned had been dreading since the night she arrived at Winterfell. The question that lived at the center of the lie and that he had been building walls around for 12 years, and that was now, sitting in the Godswood on a cold afternoon, breaking through. You're Dany. I'm not asking what my name is. I'm asking what I am. Her voice was steady. 12 years old and steady. The Targaryen blood or the Stark raising or both. Normal people burn. I didn't. Normal people don't dream about dragon eggs. I do. Something is different about me. You've known it since I was born. That's why you look at me the way you look at me. Ned sat with the weight of 14 years pressing on his shoulders. He could lie. He was good at lying. He'd been doing it since the Tower of Joy, since Dragonstone, since the night he rode north with a baby in his saddlebag and a fiction in his mouth. He could say, "You're my daughter. The eyes are lysine. The fire was luck. The dreams are just dreams." But Dany was sitting in front of him with unburned skin and purple eyes, and the specific Targaryen inheritance of fireproofing that didn't announce itself in every generation, but that announced itself now. In this generation, in this girl. And the lie was not going to hold. Not here, he said. Tonight, in my solar. I'll tell you tonight. All of it. All of it. Including why you look at Jon the same way you look at me. Ned's breath stopped. I'm not stupid, Dany said. You look at Jon and me the same way. The same watching. The same fear. You're afraid for us. Both of us. And that means there's something about both of us that connects. Ned looked at this girl, this 12-year-old who had been raised in his castle and fed at his side table and kept alive through his lie, and saw, not for the first time, but with new force, the intelligence that the Targaryen blood, sometimes produced. Not the madness, the other thing. The piercing clarity that cut through deception the way Valyrian steel cut through regular armor. "Tonight," he said. "Both of us? Jon too. Jon too." The Telling, 296 OC. He told them at the same time. In the solar. Night, the door locked. Catelyn not present. Ned had thought about including her, and had decided against it because including Catelyn meant explaining things to Catelyn that would change Catelyn's understanding of everything he'd done for 14 years, and that conversation needed to happen separately, and not in front of the children. Jon sat in the chair by the fire. Dany sat on the settle by the window. They were both looking at Ned with the expression of children who knew something important was coming and who had arranged their faces for it. Ned stood at the desk. He didn't sit. Sitting felt wrong. Felt like a conversation rather than a confession. And what he was about to do was a confession. "Dany, your mother was Queen Rhaella Targaryen. Your father was King Aerys. You are Daenerys Targaryen, the last true-born daughter of the Targaryen dynasty." The room held. Dany's face went blank. Then not blank. The surface locked down, but something enormous moving underneath, visible the way plate tectonics were visible. In the tremors, not the shift. "You're..." She stopped. Started again. "I'm a Targaryen." "Yes." "My father was the Mad King." "Yes." "And you took me. From Dragonstone. I took you because Stannis was coming and Robert wanted every Targaryen dead and you were hours old, and I had already..." His voice caught. The emotion he'd been holding for 12 years, pushing at the walls he'd built around it. I had already seen what happened to Targaryen children in Robert's kingdom. Rhaenys and Aegon. Elya's children. Murdered. 3 years old and murdered. I couldn't. And Jon. Ned looked at Jon. Jon was still. The combat stillness that Ned recognized. The response Jon defaulted to when something hit him that was too large for the available emotional space. Feet planted. Weight centered. Braced. "Jon is Lyanna's son," Ned said. "My sister. And Rhaegar's. Rhaegar Targaryen." Jon's face. "Lyanna made me promise. At the Tower of Joy. She was dying, and she made me promise that her son would live. I brought him north. I called him my bastard. I lied to everyone. Cat, Robert, the lords, the realm, because the truth would have killed him." The solar was full of silence that had edges. Dany spoke first. "We're cousins." Yes. Jon is Rhaegar's son. You're Rhaegar's sister. Jon is your nephew." A beat. "No. I'm Rhaegar's sister, and Jon is Rhaegar's son. I'm his aunt." Dany looked at Jon. "I'm your aunt." "You're 12, Jon said. His voice was flat. Shock flat. The kind of flat that happened when the emotional processing was so backed up that nothing was getting through. "And you're my nephew." They stared at each other. The absurdity of it. Aunt and nephew, 12 and 14, sitting in a solar in Winterfell having just learned that they were royalty and refugees and the last surviving members of a dynasty that had ruled for 3 centuries, cracked something in both of them. Not laughter. Something adjacent to laughter. The sound of 2 children encountering something so large that the body needed to do something and the only thing available was the noise. Ned watched them. He didn't interrupt. He let the cracking happen because the cracking was necessary. It was the sound of the old understanding breaking to make room for the new one. And it needed to happen before the new one could take its place. The cracking passed. Jon said, "Robert would kill us." "Yes." "He doesn't know." "Nobody knows. About either of you." "Cat, Lady Stark, doesn't know. About either of you. She believes you're both. Mine." "My bastards," Dany said. She hates me. Ned flinched. She doesn't. She hates me. She hates what she thinks I represent. A second betrayal. A second woman. She's carried that for 12 years. Dany's voice was controlled in a way that 12-year-olds' voices shouldn't be controlled. And none of it was real. None of it was what she thought. No. Are you going to tell her? Are you going to tell your wife that the 2 children she's been resenting for 12 years are not yours? That the shame she's carried, that you let her carry, was for nothing? Ned's jaw, the muscle working. Jon said, Dany, don't. She turned to Jon. Don't protect him from this. He lied to everyone. To us, to Cat, to everyone. For 12 years. He lied to keep us alive. I know why he lied. I'm not questioning the why. I'm questioning the... She stopped, breathed. Do you know what it's like to sit at the side table every day and be treated like a mistake? To see Lady Stark look at you and know that every time she sees you, she feels pain. And the pain is based on something that isn't even true. Her voice broke, repaired itself. You could have told her. She would have kept the secret. I couldn't risk. You didn't trust her. The words landed like a mace. That's what this is, Dany said. You didn't trust your own wife. 20 years of marriage, and you didn't trust her with the truth. Ned sat down. The standing had become impossible. I made a decision, he said. His voice was stripped. No authority, no lordship, no Ned Stark, the Warden of the North. Just a man in a chair, explaining something he wasn't sure he could defend. When Jon was born, when I brought you home, I decided that the fewer people who knew, the safer you both would be. Every person who knows is a person who can be compelled to tell. Every person who carries the secret is a person who can break under pressure. I chose to carry it alone because alone was safest. Alone was also cruelest, Dany said. Ned closed his eyes. Jon said, She's right. Ned opened his eyes. She's right, and it doesn't change anything. Jon's voice was the specific Stark voice, the one that sounded like Ned's, and that was, in this moment, being aimed at Ned the way Ned aimed it at problems he couldn't look away from. You did what you did. It kept us alive. It cost people. It cost Cat. It cost Dany. It cost you. He held Ned's gaze. Now what? Now you know. Now we know. And what do we do with knowing? Ned looked at his hands. Nothing. For now. Robert is alive. Robert is king. The secret stays. You know what you are. Both of you. And you know why it can't leave this room. For how long? Dany asked. I don't know. That's not good enough. It's what I have. Dany stood, walked to the window. The godswood was dark below them, the heart tree a pale smear in the moonlight. I'm a Targaryen, she said. Not to Ned, not to Jon, to the window, to herself. My father was the Mad King. My brother was the prince who started the rebellion. My mother died giving birth to me on a rock in the sea during a storm. She turned back. I'm the blood of the dragon and I've been eating at the side table. Dany, I'm not angry at you. She held Ned's gaze. I'm angry at the shape of it. The way the world is arranged so that a 12-year-old girl has to eat at the wrong table because her grandfather was insane and her brother was reckless and a fat king on a stolen throne wants her dead. She breathed. You saved me. I know that. You saved both of us. The cost was... She looked at Jon. The cost was us, and we're alive to feel the cost, which means the saving worked. Jon stood, went to her, didn't touch her, Jon's physical vocabulary was limited, the Stark reserve compounded by the bastard's caution. But he stood beside her, and the standing was itself a statement. "We keep the secret," Jon said, to Ned. "For now, because you're right that Robert would kill us, and you're right that the fewer who know, the safer we are." He held Ned's gaze. "But Kat needs to know." "Jon." "She needs to know. She's spent 14 years hating something that doesn't exist. 12 years resenting Dany for something Dany didn't do. That's... You owe her the truth, father." The word father came out complicated, layered, not bitter. Jon wasn't bitter. That wasn't in his architecture, but weighted. The sound of a word that meant something different now than it had meant this morning. Ned looked at Jon, looked at Dany. "I'll tell her," he said. "Not tonight, but soon." "When?" "Soon." "You keep saying that." "I know." Jon and Dany left the solar together. In the hallway, in the dark, with the torches guttering and the castle asleep around them, they stood and looked at each other. "Aunt Dany," Jon said. "Don't. Too weird." "Way too weird." They almost smiled. Almost. "We're the last Targaryens," Dany said. "Except Viserys, wherever he is. There's a dynasty that ruled for 300 years, and there are 3 of us left, and 2 of us have been eating at the wrong table in a castle in the north." "We're also Starks," Jon said. "However it happened. We were raised here. We grew up here. The north is ours. In a way that King's Landing and Dragonstone and all of it, those are just names. This is the place. The side table is the place. The side table is the place. Yeah." He looked at her. "We keep the secret. We train. We learn. We prepare for whatever comes." "You sound like a king." "I sound like someone who's been told he's a prince 2 hours ago and is compensating." "Yeah," Dany said. "That's what kings sound like." They went to bed. Neither of them slept. Catelyn. The Truth. 297. Ned told her on a night in late winter, in their bedchamber, with the door locked and the fire burning low, and the specific privacy of a married couple's room, at the hour when the household was asleep and the pretending could stop. He told her everything. Lyanna and Rhaegar. The Tower of Joy. Jon, not his bastard, but his nephew, Lyanna's son, the child she died to protect. The promise, the lie, Dragonstone, Rhaella's death. Baby Daenerys, not his bastard daughter, but the last true-born child of the Targaryen dynasty. The storm, the ride north. The second lie, built on top of the first. The architecture of deception that had grown for 13 years inside the walls of their marriage. Catelyn sat on the bed. She didn't speak while he told it. Didn't interrupt. Didn't ask questions. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, and her face arranged in the expression of a woman who was hearing things that were rearranging the fundamental architecture of her understanding, and who was not going to let the rearranging happen publicly, even if the only public was her husband. When Ned finished, the room was full of the kind of silence that had weight and temperature, and could be felt against the skin. 13 years. Yes. 13 years. You let me believe. She stopped. Her hands were no longer folded. They were gripping each other, white-knuckled, the specific physical expression of someone managing an internal detonation through sheer force of will. You let me hate myself for hating those children. Do you understand that? I hated myself for the way I treated them, for the coldness, for the side table, for every time I looked at Jon and felt rage at a woman who didn't exist, for every time I looked at Dany and saw a second betrayal that was... Her voice cracked. Not broke, cracked. a controlled fracture in a controlled surface. That was a fiction. That you made. I know what I did. Do you? She stood. Do you know what it's like to carry anger for 13 years and then learn the anger was manufactured? Not by malice, by your husband's honor. She turned the word honor into something sharp. Your honor kept them safe. Your honor also, Ned, I have treated that girl like she was the evidence of your worst moment. For 12 years. I've been cold to her. I've kept her at the wrong table, and I've watched her feel it, and I've told myself the feeling was the natural consequence of being born outside a marriage, and the entire time she was a princess, the daughter of a queen. And she was in my house, feeling like a mistake. Ned sat in the chair by the fire because his legs wouldn't hold him anymore. What do you want me to say? I want you to say something that makes this make sense. Catelyn's eyes were red but dry. She was not going to cry. Catelyn Tully Stark did not cry when she was angry. She burned. River run ice. Cold and clear and devastating. 13 years, Ned. 13 years of me being the villain of these children's lives because you didn't trust me. It wasn't trust. It was exactly trust. You calculated the risk, and I came out on the wrong side of the calculation. You decided that your wife, the mother of your children, the woman who has run this castle and this household and your life for 13 years, was too dangerous to tell. Every person who knows is a person who can talk. Yes, you've said. And in 13 years of marriage, I have kept every secret you've ever shared with me. Every one. Because that's what I do. That's what Tullys do. We hold. Ned looked at the fire. The fire looked back with the indifferent contempt of an element that didn't care about human problems. What now? He asked. Catelyn paced. 4 steps to the window. 4 steps back. The contained movement of a woman whose body needed to do something while her mind processed. Now I am going to apologize to those children. Cat. Not publicly, I'm not going to make a scene. But I am going to go to Dany, and I am going to... She stopped. Her jaw worked. I'm going to tell her that I'm sorry for 12 years of treating her like her existence was an insult. And then I'm going to figure out how to live in this castle with the truth instead of the lie. Robert is 1,000 miles south, and he's been too drunk to notice anything more complicated than a wine cup for 5 years. Robert is not going to discover 2 Targaryen children in Winterfell because Robert doesn't come to Winterfell. She held his gaze. The risk you've been managing for 13 years is a risk I could have been managing with you if you'd let me. I'm sorry. I know you're sorry. She sat back down. The energy was banking down, not gone, redirected. The Tully pragmatism that Catelyn could engage even in the middle of an emotional catastrophe. The practical machinery that said, what's done is done. What matters now is what happens next. I believe you're sorry. That is not the same as forgiving you. And forgiving you is going to take, I don't know how long. A long time. I understand. No. You don't. Because you've never been on this side of it. She looked at him. You've been the one carrying the secret. The one making the sacrifice. The noble one. The one who suffered in silence. That's a clean pain. The pain of doing the right thing for the wrong reason. She paused. My pain is different. My pain is the discovery that I've been cruel to children for 13 years. And the cruelty was based on a lie told to me by the person I love most. That's not clean. That's dirty. And it's going to take me a long time to wash. Ned had nothing to say to that. Catelyn went to Dany the next morning. She found her in the broken tower, which was where Dany went when she wanted to be somewhere that wasn't the main household, which was most of the time. Dany was reading. She developed a voracious reading habit, consuming the library at Winterfell with the intensity of a child who was looking for herself in the pages and not finding her. Catelyn stood in the doorway. Dany looked up. The expression on her face, the immediate wariness, the automatic assessment of, what did I do wrong this time, hit Catelyn like a physical blow. "May I sit?" Dany's eyes widened. Catelyn had never asked to sit in Dany's space. Catelyn had never acknowledged that Dany had a space. "Yes." Catelyn sat on the stone bench across from Dany's reading corner. She said, "I know who you are." Dany went very still. Catelyn said, "Ned told me. Last night. Everything." She held Dany's gaze. "I know you're not his daughter. I know who your parents were. I know why you're here." Dany's book was still open in her hands, but she wasn't reading anymore. She was watching Catelyn the way she watched everything, with the focused attention of a girl who had learned to read rooms before she could read books. "And I owe you an apology." The room changed. "For 12 years I've treated you as—" Catelyn stopped, found the words. They were hard to find because the honest version of them was ugly, and the polished version of them was dishonest, and Catelyn was choosing honesty because Dany had had enough dishonesty for one lifetime. As a reminder of a betrayal that never happened. I looked at you and saw a woman who didn't exist, a woman your father supposedly, and I punished you for her. For 12 years. Dany set down the book. You were a child. You had done nothing. You are, a child who was brought into this house for protection, and I turned the protection into a punishment because I was angry at your father, and your father was, not your father, was my husband who was lying to me, and the lie. Her voice threatened to crack again. She held it. The lie was the architecture of everything, and you were living inside it. Dany said, "You don't have to." "I do. I have to say this. Because you deserve to hear it, and because if I don't say it now, I'll find a way to make it smaller over time. And the smallering is its own kind of lie." Catelyn leaned forward. "I am sorry. For the side table. For the coldness. For every morning you woke up in this castle and felt like you were unwelcome. You were not unwelcome. You were misunderstood. By me. Because of a lie told to me by a man I love, and the love does not excuse the cruelty." Dany looked at Catelyn for a long time. Then she said something Catelyn did not expect. "It's not your fault." Catelyn blinked. "He lied to you. He built the lie and put you inside it and let you live in it for 13 years. You responded to what you thought was true. The cruelty." Dany's voice was careful, measured, the voice of a 12-year-old who had spent her life observing adults and who understood adult motivations better than adults were comfortable with. The cruelty was real. I felt it. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. But it came from a fiction, and the fiction was his, not yours. It doesn't erase it, I know. But it redirects the anger. The anger should be at him, not at yourself. Dany held Catelyn's gaze with the purple eyes that Catelyn had been looking at for 12 years, and that she could now see clearly for what they were. Not Dornish, not Lysine, Targaryen. The eyes of the dynasty. "You came here to apologize. I accept the apology. What happens now is different. Not fixed. Different." Catelyn looked at this girl. She thought, "She is 12 years old, and she just absolved me of 13 years of cruelty with more grace than I've managed in 40 years of being alive." She thought, "The Targaryen blood produces madness, and it produces this." The coin flip. And this girl, this specific girl, landed on the right side. She thought, Ned was right to save her. even though the saving cost me, even though the method was wrong. He was right. She didn't say any of this. She stood. She smoothed her dress. She walked to the door. At the door. Dinner tonight. High table. Dany's breath caught. Besides Sansa. If she asks, and she will ask, tell her I arranged it. Catelyn left. Dany sat in the broken tower with her book unread and her heart doing something it had never done before, which was the specific, unfamiliar thing that happened when a door you'd stopped believing would open suddenly opened, and the light on the other side was real. Ned and Jon, The Godswood, 297 AC. Jon came to the Godswood 3 days after the telling and stood in front of Ned and said, "You let her hate me." Ned was cleaning ice. The greatsword required maintenance that was part ritual and part actual necessity. Valyrian steel held an edge forever, but the hilt was leather, and the leather needed oiling, and the process of oiling it was the thing Ned did when he needed his hands occupied. "Cat, you let Lady Stark, you let her believe I was your bastard for 14 years, and she..." Jon's voice was under control, but the control was work. "She looked at me every day like I was the proof of something she couldn't forgive. And I absorbed it. Every day. For 14 years. And none of it was real. Jon, you could have told her. You told me you considered it. That first year. That you almost told her. And you didn't. Because you calculated the risk, and the calculation said, let my wife carry unnecessary pain rather than share the secret. The secret could have killed me. I know. You've said. And I believe you. I believe Robert would have killed me, and I believe the fewer people who knew the safer I was. I believe the logic. Jon sat on the root of the heart tree. I don't believe the cruelty was necessary. Ned set down ice. The sword rested against the heart tree's trunk, the dark, rippled steel catching the watery light that filtered through the canopy. You're right. Jon looked up. You're right. I could have told Cat. Not in the first year. The marriage was too new. The trust wasn't built. But later, in the 5th year, the 8th, the 10th. By then I knew her. I knew she could carry it. I knew she wouldn't break. Ned sat across from his nephew. His nephew, not his son. The word still felt wrong in his mouth even now. I didn't tell her, because the habit of not telling had become load-bearing. The lie was, it was structural. The house was built on it. And I was afraid that moving the foundation would collapse the house. The house collapsed anyway. Cat hated me for 14 years for nothing. Not for nothing. For a fiction. There's a difference. Not to the person living in it. Ned was silent for a long time. The Godswood did what the Godswood always did. Held the silence without judging it. Offered the cold, damp air and the heart tree's face and the sound of water somewhere underground. The same offering it had made for 8,000 years to every Stark who had come here with something too heavy for indoor rooms. I failed, Catelyn, Ned said. And I failed you. And I failed Dany. The saving was real. The cost of the saving was... I distributed the cost wrong. I took too much of it and gave too much of it, and the people I gave it to didn't know they were carrying it. That's a very neat way of describing 13 years of emotional damage. It's the best I have, Jon. Jon looked at the heart tree. At the face. At the eyes that wept red sap and that looked, in this light, like they were crying blood. Dany forgave you faster than I will. I know. She said, the anger should be at him, not at yourself. She said it to Cat. She's 12 and she's telling your wife where to aim the anger. Jon shook his head. She's better at this than you. She's better at most things than most people. That's the blood. That's her. The blood gave her purple eyes and fire resistance. The rest. The intelligence, the refusal, the ability to look at a grain manifest and see what's wrong. That's what 14 years in Winterfell produced. Ned held his gaze. The blood is the raw material. The person is the work. You sound like you're making a speech. I sound like a man who has been thinking about this for 14 years and who is finally saying it out loud to one of the two people who needed to hear it. Jon was quiet. Then, I'm not going to call you father anymore. The words hit Ned in the chest. Not because I don't. Not because you haven't been. You have been. For 14 years, you've been. Jon stopped. Found the words. They were hard to find because the honest version was complicated and the simple version was incomplete. You've been the person who raised me. That doesn't change. But the word, father, is a lie. And you've taught me, through everything, through the telling, through the cost, that lies rot. Even the ones you keep for the right reasons. What will you call me? Ned. Uncle Ned. Something that's true. Ned nodded. It cost him. He didn't show it. He picked up ice and went back to oiling the hilt, and the oil ran along the leather in the familiar pattern, and his hands were steady, and his face was stark, and the cost was underneath where costs lived in this family. Invisible, structural, load-bearing. Jon left the Godswood. Ned sat with the heart tree and the sword and the specific weight of a man who had saved 2 children by lying to everyone he loved and who was now paying the specific price of success. The children were alive. They were also, understandably, angry. And the anger was a cost that Ned had agreed to pay 14 years ago without knowing the full invoice. And the full invoice was arriving now, line by line, in conversations that he could not avoid and that he deserved. He finished oiling the sword. He went inside. The castle held. The lies held. The family, broken, patched, rebuilt around a truth that should have been told years ago, and that was too late and too early and exactly when it needed to be. The family held too. In its way. In the specific way that Stark things held. Not gracefully, not elegantly, but with the stubborn, cold, grinding endurance of people who had been surviving winters for 8,000 years and who treated emotional catastrophe with the same approach they treated weather. You endured it. You came out the other side. You kept going. Robert's visit, 298 AC. The Raven arrived in the first month of 298. Robert was coming north. Ned read the letter in his solar and felt the specific cold that had nothing to do with the weather. The cold of a secret feeling the proximity of the person it was kept from. The cold of 14 years of careful architecture about to be walked through by the one man who could bring it all down. He went to Catelyn. Robert is coming to Winterfell. Catelyn's response was immediate and operational. Not panic, planning. The specific Tully gear shift that turned fear into logistics. Dany's hair. What? Her hair. The silver. In a crowd. In the Great Hall, at a distance. It could be Lysing. It could be anything. But Robert knew Targaryens. Robert killed the last Targaryen he met. If Robert looks at Dany and sees silver Targaryen hair at close range, she could dye it. She won't want to. Cat. I'm telling you she won't want to. This is a girl who has spent 12 years being told she's something she's not. And she spent the last year learning what she actually is. And you're going to ask her to hide it. Catelyn looked at him. I'll talk to her. But you should know that asking a 14-year-old Targaryen to hide her Targaryen hair is asking her to do exactly the thing she spent her life resisting. She'll do it. But it will cost. Catelyn talked to Dany. Dany dyed her hair. Brown. Northern brown. The color of every other girl in Winterfell. The anonymous shade that turned silver into nothing and Targaryen into invisible. She did it in her room with a mixture Meister Lewin provided, and when she came out, she looked at herself in the polished copper, and her face did the thing that faces did when they saw themselves altered. The moment of non-recognition, the adjustment, the specific grief of seeing a part of yourself erased. Jon found her in the broken tower afterward. She was sitting on the floor. The brown hair hung around her face like a disguise, which was exactly what it was. It's temporary. Everything about me is temporary. She didn't look up. My name is temporary. My hair is temporary. I'm a princess, living in a castle as a bastard, with dyed hair, waiting for a king to leave so I can go back to being the version of myself that's slightly less fake. Jon sat beside her. I dye nothing, he said. I hide nothing. The Stark blood does the hiding for me. The grey eyes, the dark hair, the face. I look like father's bastard because I look like father's sister, and nobody alive remembers the difference. He looked at her. You got the wrong blood for hiding. Silver hair and purple eyes. The Targaryen uniform. The Targaryen uniform. My brother Viserys, wherever he is, probably walks around announcing himself. Purple eyes, silver hair. I am the dragon. And I'm in Winterfell, dyeing my hair brown. You're also alive. Viserys might not be. Dany looked at him. The directness of that, the blunt, stark delivery applied to a terrible truth, cut through the self-pity the way Jon cut through things, cleanly, without apology. That's true. Being alive and hidden is better than being visible and dead. That's the calculation. It's ugly. It works. You sound like father. I sound like someone who's been hiding in plain sight for 14 years and who's gotten used to the arithmetic. Robert arrived 3 days later. He came through the gates of Winterfell with 300 men and a wheelhouse and the specific energy of a king who had been drinking for 15 years and who brought the drinking with him the way other men brought armor. Robert Baratheon at 35 was not the Robert who'd killed Rhaegar at the Trident. He was larger, louder, the muscle going to fat, the warrior's body becoming the body of a man who ate and drank as a primary occupation and who ruled as a secondary one. He embraced Ned in the courtyard with the bone-crushing enthusiasm of a man who loved his friend and who expressed love through physical force. You got old. You got fat. The exchange was ritual, familiar. Two men performing the friendship that was real underneath the performance. Then Robert looked at the household assembled behind Ned, and Ned felt the cold again. The secret cold. The proximity cold. Jon was there, looking like Ned's bastard, looking like a Stark, invisible in the way that Jon was always invisible, because the blood had given him the right disguise. Dany was there, brown-haired, keeping her eyes down, standing near the back of the household line in the position Catelyn had arranged. Maximum distance from Robert, minimum visibility. Robert's gaze swept the household, lingered on Robb. Strong boy, that one, he'll be a fighter. Passed over Sansa, Arya, Bran, baby Rickon, stopped on Jon. And this must be the bastard. Ned's heartbeat was audible inside his own skull. Your boy, is he? Looks like you. He does. Robert clapped Ned on the shoulder and moved on, and the moment passed, and Ned breathed, and Jon breathed, and in the back of the line, Dany breathed. Robert did not notice Dany. This was the thing, the absurd, infuriating, salvation-producing thing. Robert Baratheon did not notice bastard daughters. Robert noticed bastard sons because Robert had bastard sons and recognized the category. Robert noticed women who were beautiful and available. A 14-year-old girl with brown hair standing quietly at the back of a household line was beneath his attention in every sense. Too young to interest him, too unimportant to register, too anonymous to merit a second glance. Catelyn's planning had been precise. Robert stayed for a week. During that week, Dany did not attend a single meal in the Great Hall. She ate in the kitchens. She avoided the corridors Robert frequented. She became, for 7 days, the ghost of Winterfell, present in the castle but invisible in it, the specific talent that bastard children developed for making themselves small in spaces that didn't want them, applied now with conscious intent rather than unconscious habit. Jon attended everything. Jon had to. The bastard son was expected to be present, to be seen, to be the evidence of Ned's one human failing. Jon sat at the side table and ate his meals, and answered Robert's occasional jokes about bastard sons and northern women, and endured it the way Jon endured things, by going deeper inside himself and waiting for the surface to be safe again. On the 5th night, Robert got drunk. This was not unusual. Robert got drunk every night, the way the sun set every evening, a natural process that was predictable in its arc and its consequences. But on the 5th night, Robert got drunk in a way that loosened something that had been tightened by the act of being in Winterfell, in Ned's home, in the place that reminded Robert of the last time he'd been truly alive, which was the war. He said to Ned, in the solar, with a cup that had been refilled 4 times, "You ever wonder about the Targaryen girl?" Ned's blood went cold. What girl? Rhaella's. The baby, born on Dragonstone in the storm. Robert waved the cup. Never found her. Stannis took the island and the baby was gone. Darry took the boy, Viserys, across the sea. But the girl, nobody knows. She's probably dead. Probably. Robert drank. Infants don't survive that kind of chaos. Storm, a dying mother, a collapsing garrison. Probably didn't last the week. He looked at the fire. Should have found the body, though. Always bothered me. The boy, Viserys, we know where he is. Pentos, last anyone heard. Begging for an army. Pathetic. He drank again. But the girl. No body. Robert, I know. You're going to tell me it doesn't matter. 15 years ago. She's dead or she's across the sea, and either way she's nothing. But he set down the cup. Targaryens don't die easy, Ned. The blood won't let them. They survive things that would kill regular people. Fire and shipwreck and exile, and the blood persists. Ned looked at his friend. At the man he loved. At the man who would walk downstairs and kill a 14-year-old girl with brown hair and purple eyes if he knew what she was. She's gone, Robert. Let it be. Robert drank. Yeah, you're right. Doesn't matter. He poured another cup. Tell me about Jon Arryn. Tell me about the Hand. The conversation moved on. Ned sat in the solar after Robert left for bed, and his hands were shaking so hard he couldn't hold the quill. Robert left 3 days later. He took Ned with him, south, to King's Landing, to be Hand. Ned went because Robert asked, and because Jon Arryn was dead, and because Ned Stark did not refuse calls to duty, which was both his greatest quality and his most dangerous limitation. He went south. He left the secret behind. 2 Targaryen children in Winterfell, hidden in plain sight, waiting. Winterfell, after Ned left. 2 PS. Without Ned, the secret shifted. Not the secret itself, the weight of it, the distribution. Ned had been carrying the majority of the weight for 14 years, and when he went south, the weight didn't leave with him. It settled onto the people who remained. Catelyn, who had known for a year and who was still building the internal architecture to hold it. Jon, who was 16 and who carried his piece with the specific compressed intensity of a boy who understood that one wrong word in front of one wrong person would kill him and Dany and everyone they loved. And Dany, who was 14 and who had spent 2 years knowing what she was and who had developed, through the knowing, a stillness that was not Stark. Stillness. quieter, more watchful, the stillness of fire banked rather than absent. Catelyn managed. This was what Catelyn did. She managed Winterfell the way she had managed it for 13 years. The household, the bannermen, the ravens, the 1,000 administrative threads that kept a castle functioning. But now she managed with the additional layer of managing the secret, which meant managing Jon and Dany's public visibility, their interactions with visitors, the specific performance of ordinariness that was required to maintain a lie that had been maintained for 14 years and that needed to be maintained indefinitely. She moved Dany to the high table permanently. This was noticed by the servants, by the household, by the few bannermen who visited during the period of Ned's absence. Noticed and interpreted the way changes in a great house were always interpreted, as evidence of shifting dynamics, of Lady Stark having revised her opinion of the bastard girl, of a thaw in the relationship that had been cold for 12 years. Sansa asked. Sansa was 13, sharp, attuned to social dynamics, the way Arya was attuned to physical ones. She noticed the table change, and she noticed the shift in her mother's treatment of Dany, and she noticed, with the specific teenage radar for emotional undercurrents, that something had changed between her mother and the girl she'd grown up resenting on her mother's behalf. Why is Dany at the high table? Catelyn, who had prepared for this question, because she should have been there all along. But you said. I was wrong. Sansa looked at her mother with the expression of a 13-year-old encountering maternal fallibility for the first time. The expression was unsettling for both of them. Dany is part of this household. She should be treated as part of this household. I have made errors in how I treated her. I'm correcting them. Sansa absorbed this the way Sansa absorbed everything, by filing it in the category of social information and adjusting her own behavior accordingly. Within a week, she was braiding Dany's hair, the brown hair, the disguise, and sharing the specific currency of 13-year-old girls, which was gossip, secrets, the bonding ritual of knowing things about each other that nobody else knew. Dany accepted this carefully, not coldly. Dany was not capable of coldness towards someone offering genuine warmth, but carefully, the way a child who had been burned, not by fire, by people, accepted warmth, with the awareness that warmth could be withdrawn, that doors that opened could close, that the high table was not permanent simply because Lady Stark had decided it was temporary. She and Sansa became something, not friends. The dynamic was too complicated for friendship, weighted by the years of separation and the gap in knowledge that Dany carried and Sansa didn't. But adjacent, close, the specific relationship of two girls in the same castle who were discovering, in the absence of the patriarch who had structured their separation, that they liked each other. Arya was different. Arya had never cared about the table. Arya had never internalized the hierarchy that placed bastards below trueborn and girls below boys, and organized the household into categories that Arya found simultaneously meaningless and infuriating. Arya liked Dany because Dany pushed, because Dany questioned, because Dany had the specific quality of refusal that Arya recognized as her own, expressed differently. Arya's refusal was physical and loud. Dany's was quiet and structural, but coming from the same place, the bone-deep rejection of being told, you can't. Arya and Dany shot together. The early morning sessions that Jon had started continued now with Arya joining, 3 of them in the grey pre-dawn light with bows and targets and the specific companionship of people who were not supposed to be doing what they were doing and who found the not supposed to exhilarating. The Raven arrived on a Tuesday. Ned was dead. The fall. 298 Robb called the banners. This was Robb's decision and Robb's moment and the specific convergence of grief and duty and 16-year-old rage that Catelyn could shape but could not stop. Robb was going south. 50,000 Northerners were going south. The war was starting. Jon went to Robb. "I'm coming." "I know. I need to tell you something first." Robb looked at him. Blue eyes, Tully eyes in a Stark face. The face of a boy who had just lost his father and who was making the transition from boy to lord in real time, the internal reconfiguration visible in the way he held himself, the way the posture shifted from the loose confidence of an eldest son to the straight-backed weight of a lord. Jon told him. Not everything. Not the Targaryen part. Not the blood. Not the dynasty. He told Robb the essential piece. I'm not father's son. I'm his nephew. Lyanna's. Robb's face went through stages. Shock. Recalculation. The specific Robb process of absorbing information that changed the picture and then rebuilding the picture with the new information included. Lyanna's and Rhaegar's. The second piece landed harder. Robb sat down. You're a Targaryen, by blood, raised Stark. I've known for 2 years. And Dany, Jon hesitated. She's Targaryen too, not father's daughter. Rhaella's, the last princess. Father took her from Dragonstone. Robb stared at him, then at the tent wall, then at Grey Wind, who was watching this conversation the way Grey Wind watched everything, with the focused attention of an animal who processed human emotions through scent and who was currently smelling something that was changing rapidly. Two of you. Robb's voice was strange, not angry, recalibrating. He hid 2 Targaryens in Winterfell for 14 years and told no one until 2 years ago. Mother? Knows now. Since last year. Robb was quiet for a very long time. Grey Wind put his head in Robb's lap, and Robb's hand found the wolf's ear, and the grounding happened the way it always happened. Through the animal, through the contact, through the specific thing that direwolves provided, that was not comfort but stability. All right. All right. What do you want me to say? You're my brother. You've been my brother for 16 years. The blood doesn't change. He stopped. It changes things. Politically. But it doesn't change. We're brothers, Jon. We were brothers yesterday. We're brothers today. The Targaryen part is... He waved his hand. It's information. I'll deal with information. That's what lords do. Dany comes with us. Robb looked at him sharply. She's 14. She's Targaryen. If we leave her at Winterfell, and Winterfell falls, if the Ironborn come, if Bolton moves, if anyone, she's alone. She's safer with the army. A 14-year-old girl is safer with an army than in a castle. This 14-year-old girl is. She shoots. She fights. Not well, not trained, but she fights. And she... Jon stopped. She has qualities that might be useful, that you can't get from anyone else. What qualities? I'm not sure yet. But the fire, the dreams, the blood is doing things, Robb, in both of us. And whatever those things are, they're going to be needed. Robb looked at him with the expression of a 16-year-old who had just learned that his household contained 2 secret Targaryens and who was being asked to take both of them to war. Fine. She comes. But she stays near the supply train. Not the front. She won't like that. She doesn't have to like it. She has to be alive. Dany came. She rode south with the army, brown-haired, northern-dressed, carrying a bow that Jon had made for her and wearing the expression of a 14-year-old who was finally moving towards something instead of hiding from it. The war began. The Whispering Wood. What the Fire Did. 299 AC. The battle at the Whispering Wood was 3 miles from the supply train. Dany heard it. Not the words of the fighting, the texture. The percussion of steel on steel carried through the trees like an irregular heartbeat, and the shouting underneath it was not individual voices, but a single continuous sound. The specific noise that happened when 3,000 men tried to kill each other in a confined space. She stood at the supply wagons and listened, and her hands shook. Not from fear, from something else. From the blood. The Targaryen blood that heard the sound of battle and responded not with the flight instinct of a civilian, but with a pull, a directional magnetism that said, toward, that said, closer, that said, this is the thing the blood was made for. She didn't go. She stayed with the wagons because she'd promised Robb, and because the promise was smart, and because the blood's pull was not command but suggestion, and she was learning. Had been learning for 2 years since the fire in the kitchen, to distinguish between what the blood wanted and what the situation required. After the battle. The aftermath. Robb came back with Jaime Lannister in chains and the specific look of a 16-year-old who had just won his first battle and who was processing the winning in real time, the adrenaline and the grief and the cost all running through him at once. Jon came back with blood on his sword and a face that Dany recognized because it was the face she'd seen in the mirror after the kitchen fire. The expression of someone who had discovered something about themselves that was too large for the expression and that was being held inside with brute force. She went to Jon that night. He was sitting outside his tent in the dark, cleaning his sword with the methodical attention of someone whose hands needed occupation, while his mind processed something it didn't want to process. How many? He looked up. 3. How do you feel? Like I've done something that needs to be done and the needing doesn't make the doing. He shook his head. I don't have the words. You don't need words. I can see it. The fire thing? Not the fire thing. The other thing. The reading thing. You and I, we read each other. Since we were children. I don't need you to tell me what you feel, because I can see it the same way I can see when a supply manifest is wrong. It's just there. In the pattern. Jon looked at her. 14 years old. Brown-dyed hair. Sitting in the dirt outside a tent in a war camp, telling him that she could read his emotional state the way she read logistics. It was simultaneously the most clinical and most intimate thing anyone had ever said to him. The blood. Maybe. Or maybe we just grew up together. Both. Both. She took the sword from his hands because his hands needed to stop, and the stopping wasn't going to happen while they had something to hold. The killing doesn't get easier. That's what I've been told. Who told you that? Jory Castle. Before he went south with father. He said, the first one is the worst, and the second one is worse, because you thought the first one was the worst, and you were wrong. She set the sword down. He said the only thing that gets easier is the carrying. You get stronger. The weight stays the same. Jory is dead. I know. His advice isn't. Jon looked at the sky. Northern stars. Not the stars of home. Not the Dornish stars that neither of them would have seen because neither of them had ever been to Dorne. But northern stars, Winterfell stars, the constellations they'd learned on the roof of the broken tower. I'm glad you're here, he said. At the supply train. Here. In the campaign. I don't mean at the fighting. I mean here. Where I can find you afterward. Dany didn't respond to that with words. She sat beside him in the dark, and they were 2 Targaryen children in a northern war camp in the aftermath of a battle they hadn't started, and that they were both, in their different ways, going to have to keep fighting. The stars didn't care. But the sitting helped. Sansa and Dany. King's Landing. 219. Sansa came to Dany's office 3 weeks after arriving. She came with a list. This was how Sansa approached the world. Through lists. Through organized information. through the specific, systematic cataloguing of reality that Cersei's court had taught her was the only reliable weapon available to a girl without a sword. The servants' network. Dany looked up from the grain ledgers. The office smelled like ink and flour, and the specific exhaustion of a 14-year-old who had been working 16-hour days for a month and who was sustained by the combination of Targaryen stubbornness and northern tea. What about it? I've mapped it. The information channels that run through the kitchens, the laundries, the stables. Who talks to whom? Who knows what? Who can be trusted and who carries tales? Sansa laid the list on the desk. Your supply chain runs on people. The people run on trust. I can tell you which people trust, which other people, and where the trust breaks down. Dany looked at the list. It was meticulous. Names, positions, connections, the specific social architecture of a castle's workforce, rendered in Sansa's elegant hand with the precision of a cartographer mapping terrain. You did this in 3 weeks. I did this in 6 months, in Cersei's court. I just didn't write it down until now because writing it down at Cersei's court would have been... Sansa paused. Lethal. You memorized. Hundreds of names, relationships, loyalties, patterns. Sansa sat down across from Dany. I had nothing else to do. I was a hostage. The only power available to a hostage is information. And information is only power if you can remember it accurately. She looked at Dany. I am very accurate. Dany studied the list, cross-referenced it with her supply chain personnel. Found, instantly, the pattern recognition that was either Targaryen blood or Winterfell training or both. 3 names that appeared on both lists. 3 people who were in positions to affect both the information flow and the grain distribution. These 3. Sansa looked at the names, nodded. 2 are reliable. The 3rd is manageable. With the right approach. What's the right approach? Information that makes them feel important. People who feel important are loyal to the person who makes them feel important. It's cheaper than gold and more reliable. Dany looked at her cousin. 13 years old. Red hair. The Tully red that looked nothing like Targaryen silver. Blue eyes that held the specific, focused intelligence of a girl who had spent 6 months in a hostile court and who had emerged not broken, but sharpened, the way blades were sharpened, by being pushed against something harder than they were. We work together, Dany said. Not a question, a decision. Sansa looked at the grain ledgers, looked at the servant map, looked at Dany with the assessment of a girl evaluating a partnership. We work together. They shook on it. The handshake was brief and formal and contained in the contact the specific weight of 2 girls who had been on opposite sides of a household hierarchy for 12 years and who were now discovering that the hierarchy had been a fiction and the skills it had produced in both of them were complementary. Sansa's information, Dany's logistics. The combination produced a governance capability that the Lords didn't see, because the Lords were looking at Robb and at Jon, and at the swords, and the battles, and the visible machinery of power, and the invisible machinery, the grain, the trust, the information, was being built by 2 girls who had been trained for it by the specific education of being underestimated. They worked together. It worked. The camp. What Dany saw, 298, 299 AC. The Northern Army was not what Dany expected. She had read about armies. The histories at Winterfell described them in the language of strategy and heroism, formations, charges, the decisive moments that songs were built from. The actual army was different. The actual army was 50,000 men who ate and slept and argued and got sick and missed their families, and who needed to be fed and watered and sheltered and organized. And the organizing was the war long before the fighting was. Dany understood logistics. This surprised everyone, including Dany. She had grown up in a castle, not a camp. But castles were logistics. Winterfell was a machine that fed 500 people and heated 1,000 rooms and managed an economy of servants and supplies, and the specific daily arithmetic of keeping a household alive through a northern winter. Dany had watched Catelyn do this for 12 years. She had absorbed the watching the way she absorbed everything, unconsciously, comprehensively, the way a child raised inside a system understood the system without being taught it. She went to the supply train on the second day of the march, not because anyone sent her, because she looked at the wagons and saw what was wrong. The grains packed wrong. The supply officer, a Cerwyn man named Hallis, 40 years old, the specific, exhausted competence of a man who had been managing provisions since before Dany was born, looked at her with the expression of a man being told his job by a 14-year-old girl. Is it? The heavy stores are on top. They should be on the bottom. Bottom-heavy carts don't tip on uneven terrain. You're going to lose a wagon on the first bad road. Hallis looked at the wagons, looked at Dany, looked at the wagons again. Where'd you learn that? Winterfell. Watching. She shrugged. The castle gets supply deliveries every week. The drivers who pack heavy bottom don't tip. The ones who pack heavy top do. It's not complicated. Hallis repacked the wagons. They didn't lose one on the bad road. Catelyn noticed. Catelyn noticed everything regarding logistics, because logistics was Catelyn's language, the way swordsmanship was Robb's. She came to Dany on the third evening. You repacked the grain wagons. They were going to tip. I saw. Catelyn looked at her. The assessment was not maternal. It was professional. The specific evaluation of a woman who ran the largest household in the north, recognizing the same skill set in someone else. How much of the supply operation do you understand? All of it. At the Winterfell scale. This is larger than Winterfell. Same principles, more mouths. Catelyn was quiet for a moment. Then, come to the supply meeting tomorrow morning. Dany came to the supply meeting. She sat in the corner and listened, and said nothing for the first 3 meetings. On the 4th meeting, when the supply officers were arguing about the provisioning of the Riverlands campaign, how much grain to carry versus how much to forage, the specific logistics question that determined whether an army could sustain a campaign longer than 3 months, Dany spoke. Carry 2 months. Forage the 3rd. Set the foraging parties 3 days ahead of the main column so the forage is staged before the army arrives. The supply officers looked at her. If you carry 3 months, the wagons slow the column. If you forage from day 1, you strip the countryside, and the locals become enemies. 2 months of carried supply gives you speed. The staged foraging gives you the 3rd month without the supply train becoming an anchor. Hallis looked at Catelyn. Catelyn said, do what she said. The foraging system worked. Not perfectly. Nothing logistical worked perfectly, and the imperfections were themselves lessons that Dany catalogued and adjusted for. But the army moved faster than its supply train should have allowed, and the Riverlands farmers, whose crops were purchased rather than seized, became, if not allies, then at least non-enemies, which was a resource that most armies wasted without knowing it was a resource. Robb noticed. He came to Dany one evening. The first time Robb had sought her out specifically. The first time their interaction had been deliberate rather than incidental. He stood at the supply wagons where Dany was reviewing the next day's distribution with Hallis, and he watched the way he watched everything at 16, which was, with the intensity of someone who was learning his job in real time and who was always looking for people who could teach him something. You're running the supply chain. I'm helping. Hallis runs it. Hallis says you run it. He said. Robb looked at a spot above her head, which was what Robb did when he was about to say something that made him uncomfortable. He said, you think about provisions the way I think about terrain, instinctively. I grew up in a castle. Castles are supply chains. Most people who grow up in castles don't learn the supply chain. Most people who grow up in castles learn the sewing or the courtesy or the... Most people who grow up in castles aren't bastard girls who eat at the side table. I didn't learn the courtesy because the courtesy wasn't offered. I learned what was available, which was the kitchen, the stores, the inventory, the part of the castle that fed people rather than the part that decorated them. She held his gaze. The decorating is useful. The feeding is essential. Robb looked at her. Really looked. Not the cursory glance of a lord registering a household member, but the full assessment of a commander evaluating a resource. I need you in the War Council. That'll be unusual. Everything about this campaign is unusual. I'm 16. My mother is my best strategist. My bastard brother fights better than anyone in the camp, and now my cousin is running the supply chain better than the officer I hired for it. He almost smiled. Unusual is the baseline. Dany went to the War Council. She sat in the corner for the first 3 sessions, the way she'd sat in the corner of the supply meetings, watching, cataloguing, learning the specific grammar of military decision-making that was different from logistical decision-making in the way that poetry was different from prose. Same language, different rhythms. On the 4th session, she spoke. Bolton's supply consumption is wrong. Everyone looked at her. I track provisions by unit. Bolton's column is drawing 10% more than it should for its numbers. Either he has more men than he's reporting or he's stockpiling. Catelyn's eyes went sharp. Stockpiling for what? That's not a supply question. That's a loyalty question. Dany held Catelyn's gaze. I can tell you what he's doing with the grain. Why he's doing it is your department. The Bolton problem was not new. Catelyn had been watching Bolton since the twins. Jon had been watching Bolton since they arrived. The specific surveillance state that Winterfell's hidden Targaryens and their Stark allies maintained over the most dangerous bannerman in the camp. But Dany's data was new. The supply discrepancy was proof, not of treachery itself, but of preparation for treachery, the logistical infrastructure of a betrayal being built inside the army. Bolton was removed 2 weeks later, sent north. The supply discrepancy was one of 3 pieces of evidence that Catelyn assembled and that tipped Robb's decision from wait and watch to act now. Dany didn't take credit for this. Credit was not useful. Credit drew attention, and attention was what the secret couldn't afford. She filed the Bolton contribution in the same place she filed everything. The category of things I can do, that people don't expect me to be able to do, and that I will continue doing without needing to be recognized for them. Jon noticed. Jon always noticed. You caught Bolton. I caught a supply discrepancy. Catelyn caught Bolton. Same thing. Not the same thing. The discrepancy was arithmetic. Bolton was politics. I did the arithmetic. She caught herself. Lady Stark did the politics. You almost called her mother. Did not. You did. Shut up. Jon almost smiled. Dany almost smiled. The almost smiles. The restrained, careful, not quite expressions of 2 people who had spent their lives hiding what they were, and who had developed the habit of hiding what they felt as a side effect, were themselves a kind of communication, a language that nobody else spoke. King's Landing, 299 AC. The city fell by hunger and pressure, and the specific mathematical inevitability of a siege conducted by people who understood what they were doing, which was Catelyn and Dany managing the logistics, and Robb managing the military, and the Tyrell alliance providing the grain and the swords that turned a northern rebellion into something the realm had to take seriously. Dany entered King's Landing beside Jon. The city smelled like rationing, the sour, metabolic smell of 500,000 people who'd been eating less for weeks. Dany recognized the smell, not from experience, from the supply ledgers, from the arithmetic of insufficient provisions, from the specific understanding of what 20% below maintenance caloric intake for 6 weeks looked like when it was expressed not as a number, but as a smell. She hated the smell. She hated it because the smell was her side's strategy, because the hunger that produced the smell was the mechanism by which they'd won, because winning by starvation was winning by turning food. The thing she'd spent months ensuring her own army had enough of, into a weapon against the people inside the walls. She said to Jon, "We did this. We had to. I know. That doesn't make the smell go away." They went to the Red Keep. Robb took the throne, not gracefully, with the specific reluctance of a 16-year-old who wanted to win the war, but had not fully considered what winning would require him to sit in. The Iron Throne was ugly and uncomfortable, and symbolized 300 years of governance that had produced the current catastrophe, and Robb sat in it with the expression of a boy who knew this was temporary, and who was going to make sure temporary meant temporary. The question of succession, the real question, the Targaryen question, waited. It waited because Catelyn said it should wait, because Catelyn understood, with the specific Tully clarity that was her greatest asset and her most frustrating quality, that announcing 2 Targaryen heirs 6 months after overthrowing a Baratheon king would fracture the coalition, alienate the lords who had profited from the rebellion, and turn a victory into a civil war. "When the realm is stable," Catelyn said, "when the lords are settled, when the immediate crisis has passed, then we have the conversation." Dany accepted this. She accepted it because Catelyn was right, and because Dany had learned, over 14 years of eating at the wrong table and 2 years of knowing why, that the right moment and the first moment were not the same, and that patience, the specific, Stark-learned patience that had been layered onto the Targaryen fire, was not weakness but strategy. She worked. She ran the provisioning of King's Landing, the specific, enormous, unglamorous project of feeding a city that had been starved into submission and that needed to be fed into loyalty. This was the work that nobody wanted, and that Dany took because she understood it, and because it needed doing, and because doing it was more useful than sitting in a room arguing about which lord got which title. She opened the grain stores. She organized the distribution. She built a system that moved Tyrell grain from the harbour to the bakeries to the markets with an efficiency that produced a specific, measurable outcome. The city stopped being 3 bad weeks from rioting and started being a city that functioned. Nobody celebrated this. Nobody wrote songs about grain distribution, the specific heroism of logistics, of making sure that 500,000 people ate, that the bakeries had flour, that the markets had bread at a price that ordinary people could pay, was invisible by nature and thankless by tradition. Dany did it anyway. She did it because Catelyn had taught her, through 12 years of watching and 1 year of collaboration, that the feeding was more important than the fighting, that the fighting decided who sat on the throne, and the feeding decided whether the throne was worth sitting in. That a kingdom was not a military victory, but a functioning economy, and a functioning economy was not a political achievement, but a supply chain. Sansa arrived 12 days after the city fell. She came from the harbour with information that changed everything. 6 months of intelligence about the court, the small council, the Tyrell position, the specific internal machinery of King's Landing that was invisible from outside the walls. Sansa and Dany had not been close at Winterfell. Close adjacent. The year of high-table proximity and hair-braiding that had been their pre-war relationship was foundation, but not structure. The structure came now, in King's Landing, where Sansa's intelligence and Dany's logistics and Catelyn's politics created a triumvirate that Robb leaned on the way a building leaned on its foundation. Constantly, invisibly, without acknowledging the leaning, because acknowledging it would have required admitting that a 16-year-old king needed 3 women to hold up his throne. They worked well together. Not without friction, Sansa's approach was social, built on relationships and reputation, and the specific currency of court life that Dany found mystifying. Dany's approach was structural, built on systems and numbers, and the specific currency of grain and gold that Sansa found boring. The friction was productive. The friction produced something that neither approach alone could have produced, a governance that was both socially functional and structurally sound. Jon watched this from beside the throne. He watched, and he thought, this is what the blood produces. Not the madness, not the fire. This, the specific Targaryen capacity for building things, for organizing chaos into structure, for taking the raw material of a broken kingdom and shaping it into something that worked. He thought, Dany is doing what Aegon did. Not the conquering. The other part. The part after the conquering. The part the songs skip because it's boring. The part where someone has to figure out how to feed the people and maintain the roads and make the kingdom function. Aegon did that. Dany is doing that. He thought, and she's 14. He told Arthur, no. He told Robb. She's doing the work that nobody else will do. I know. The grain distribution alone is... Robb, the city was 3 weeks from riots when we arrived. She's fixed it. In a month. I know, Jon. Then acknowledge it. I've acknowledged it. Privately. To her. I told her. Publicly. In the council. In front of the lords. Robb looked at him. She doesn't want attention. Because attention is dangerous when you're hiding. But the hiding is going to end, Robb. Eventually. And when it ends, the lords need to know what she's done. Not who she is. What she's done. So that when who she is comes out, the what she's done is already established. Robb thought about this. The next council meeting, Robb acknowledged the grain distribution publicly, named Dany, credited the system she'd built. The lords noted it. Not dramatically, not with a standing ovation, but with the specific adjustment of attention that happened when someone who had been invisible became visible. Dany flushed, looked at Jon. Jon looked back. I told you, his expression said. I'll kill you later, Hears replied, the northern vocabulary for gratitude. The reveal. 300 AC. Catelyn built the ground for 6 months. The Catelyn method, not announcing but preparing. Placing fragments of the truth in conversations and channels, and the specific off-the-record moments where opinion formed. Letting the lords arrive at, we need a legitimate succession, before presenting them with a candidate. A candidate before the need was felt was an imposition. A candidate after the need was acknowledged was an answer. She came to Jon and Dany on a Tuesday. Tomorrow. They were in the small solar that Dany had claimed as her office, the logistics nerve center of King's Landing, the room with the ledgers and the supply charts and the specific organized chaos of a system that was feeding 500,000 people and that bore the fingerprints of a 14-year-old girl who had spent her life being told she was nothing and who had responded by becoming essential. Both of us? Jon asked. Both of you? Catelyn sat. The lords are primed. They've heard enough fragments that the full revelation will be recognition rather than shock. I've been placing this for 6 months. Dany looked at Jon. The look lasted a second and contained a conversation that had been going on for 16 years. The conversation of 2 people who had grown up together, hidden together, who shared a blood they hadn't known about, and who were now about to announce it to a room full of men with swords. What do we say? The truth. No performance. Jon first. Lyanna's son, Rhaegar's son, raised at Winterfell. Then Dany, Rhaella's daughter, Aerys's daughter, taken from Dragonstone, raised at Winterfell. Catelyn held their gaze. The lords have watched you both for 10 months. Jon has fought and planned. Dany has fed the city. The only new information is the blood, and the blood confirms what they've already observed. And if they reject it? Some will. The Karstarks bled in the rebellion. The Glovers have grudges. Those objections are manageable. Catelyn looked at Dany. What's not manageable is the claim being weaponized by someone else. Varys knows, or suspects. The information is going to come out. I prefer it come out with our hands on it. The council convened in the morning. Robb took the floor. He told them about Jon first, Lyanna's son, Rhaegar's son, the promise Ned had made and kept for 16 years. The eruption was controlled. Catelyn had prepared the ground. Then, Dany, Daenerys Targaryen, daughter of Aerys and Rhaella, taken from Dragonstone by Ned Stark, raised at Winterfell for 14 years. The girl who had been feeding the city for the past month. The eruption was different this time. Not larger. Different. Jon's revelation had been about blood. Dany's was about something else. About the fact that this girl, this 14-year-old, who had been running the grain distribution and fixing the supply chain and doing the unglamorous essential work of keeping King's Landing alive, was a Targaryen princess. The Great Jon stood first, as always. The girl who fixed the grain supply is a Targaryen. Yes, Robb said. The girl who told Hallis to repack the wagons before we lost one on the road is a Targaryen. Yes. The girl who caught Bolton's supply discrepancy is a Targaryen. Yes. The Great Jon looked at Dany with the specific reassessment of a man who had been filing her in the category of useful but unimportant, and who was now moving her to a different category entirely. Well, he said. All right then, Lady Mormont. The North doesn't kneel to Targaryens. Dany stepped forward, not to the center of the room, to the position beside Jon, the position they'd occupied together since childhood, the side table, the broken tower, the corner of every room in which they'd been placed. I'm not asking anyone to kneel. I'm not asking for a throne or a crown or a title. She held Lady Mormont's gaze with the purple eyes that she'd been hiding for 14 years, and that she had dyed her hair to hide, and that she was now, for the first time, showing without concealment. I'm asking you to look at what you've seen. A girl who has been feeding this city for a month. A girl who grew up at Winterfell and who knows what bread costs and who can tell you how many wagons of grain it takes to keep 500,000 people alive for a week. The blood is the blood. I didn't choose it. What I chose was to come south with this army and do the work that needed doing. The Mad King's daughter, Lord Karstark said. The Mad King's daughter. Dany didn't flinch from it. And my father was a monster. My brother started a war that killed thousands of people. My grandfather built a dynasty on dragonfire. I know what the blood has done. She held the gaze. I also know what the blood has done this month, which is keep 500,000 people fed. The history of the blood is the history. What the blood does now is the present. And the present is, the grain supply is stable. The bakeries are running. And the city is not rioting. That was me. That was the Mad King's daughter. The room adjusted. Not a coronation, not a declaration, an adjustment, the specific recalibration of a room full of men revising their understanding of what they were looking at and finding that the revision was smaller than expected because the evidence had been in front of them for months and the only thing that had changed was the name. They declared, both Jon and Dany recognized. The northern formulation, the deliberate, cautious, take our time acknowledgement that was less than coronation and more than nothing. Jon and Dany accepted this. They stood beside each other in the hall and accepted it together the way they had accepted everything together since they were children at the side table, with the specific, quiet solidarity of two people who had spent their lives being told they were less, and who were now being told they were more, and who knew that the truth was somewhere in between. Catelyn watched from the back of the room. Beside her, Sansa was taking notes. Robb sat on the throne and looked at his brother and his cousin, his Targaryen brother and his Targaryen cousin. The two secrets his father had carried for 14 years, standing in the hall of the Red Keep being seen for the first time. He thought, father would be, what? Proud? Terrified? Both? He thought, both. Definitely both. The wall, what the blood called. 300 AC. The dreams came back, both of them, simultaneously. Jon dreamed of wolves. A white wolf beyond the wall, waiting for him, part of him. The specific pull of blood calling to blood across a distance that should have made the calling impossible. Dany dreamed of fire, not the kitchen fire, something deeper. The eggs from the first dream, the ones she dreamed about at 8, but clearer now, more insistent. The warmth inside the chest, the standing in fire without burning, and underneath it, a call, directional, north. They both felt it. The pull, north. The thing beyond the wall that knew they were south, and that wanted them closer. Jon said to Dany, the prophecy, Rhaegar's prophecy. I thought you didn't believe in prophecy. I don't believe in prophecy as instruction. I believe in it as information. Something is north of the wall. Something that the Watch has been reporting for 30 years. Something real. And whatever it is, it's connected to the blood. The Targaryen blood. The Stark blood. Both. The combination. Ice and fire. Yeah, the song. The prince who was promised. The thing Rhaegar believed in so hard, he destroyed his family pursuing it. And you want to go look at it. I want to go deal with it, not as prophecy, as a problem. The Watch reports say the cold is wrong, the rangings are losing people. Something is building beyond the wall, and ignoring it doesn't make it stop building. Dany looked at him. 16 years old, grey eyes, the face that was Stark, and the blood that was Targaryen, and the specific combination that Rhaegar had believed would save the world, expressed in a boy who ate too fast and left his sword unsheathed, and who had the irritating habit of being right about things that everyone else wanted to ignore. I'm coming. Dany, don't start. I've been managing this army's supplies for a year. If you think I'm going to sit in King's Landing counting bread loaves while you go beyond the wall to fight whatever's up there, it's dangerous. Everything about my life has been dangerous. I'm a Targaryen princess, raised as a bastard in a castle full of people who would have killed me if they'd known what I was. Danger is the baseline. She held his gaze. I'm coming. Jon looked at her, at the girl he'd grown up with, the girl from the side table, the girl who'd dyed her hair brown to hide from a king, and who'd repacked grain wagons, and who'd caught Bolton through supply arithmetic, and who was now standing in front of him, refusing to be left behind, the way she'd refused every limitation that had ever been placed on her. Fine. Fine. You're going to need better gear. I'm going to need you to stop telling me what I need. They went north. What they found is a different story. A story of ice and fire. Of the blood fulfilling something that neither of them asked for and both of them were built for. Of two children from the side table standing at the top of the wall and feeling the pull of the thing they were born to face. But that's beyond this telling. This telling ends here. With the reveal. With the recognition, with two Targaryen children standing in the hall of the Red Keep and being seen. What if Ned Stark raised Daenerys in Winterfell? She grew up at the wrong table. That's the first thing, and it's the most important thing. Before the blood, before the fire, before the dynasty and the dragons and the claim and all of it. The wrong table. The side table. The place where bastard children ate in great houses, separated from the legitimate by 3 feet of wood and an ocean of implication. She sat there for 12 years. Beside Jon, the other secret, the other Targaryen, the boy who looked like a Stark and who was as hidden as she was. Two of them, at the wrong table, in the same castle. The same lie, the same man's protection. Ned Stark took a baby from Dragonstone because the alternative was the baby dying. And Ned Stark had seen enough dead children for one lifetime. He carried her north. He called her his bastard daughter. He lied to his wife and his household and his king, and he maintained the lie for 14 years, with the specific, stubborn endurance of a man who believed that some lies were more honorable than the truth they replaced. The lie cost him. It cost Catelyn 13 years of misplaced anger, 13 years of cruelty aimed at a fiction. It cost Dany 12 years of the side table, 12 years of being told she was a mistake when she was actually a princess. The lie also saved her. Saved them both. Jon and Dany, alive in Winterfell. Alive because a man who couldn't lie well enough to make the lying painless had lied anyway, every day, for 14 years. She grew up. She pushed. She questioned. She refused the architecture of her own marginalization with the instinctive fury of blood that didn't know its own name. She learned to shoot in the grey pre-dawn with Jon and Arya. She learned logistics from watching Catelyn. She learned what bread cost from walking through Winterfell's kitchens. She learned that fire didn't burn her at 12, and that she was Targaryen at 12, and that the world was arranged against her at every point. She went to war. She fed an army. She caught a traitor through arithmetic. She fed a city. She stood in the hall of the Red Keep and said, "The blood is the blood. I didn't choose it. What I chose was the work." And the lords looked at her and saw, not a princess, not a dragon, a girl who knew what grain wagons weighed, and how many loaves a bakery produced, and what it cost to keep 500,000 people alive. That was enough. Not for the histories. The histories would want fire and prophecy, and the drama of blood-fulfilling destiny. The histories would want the Targaryen part. But for Dany, for the girl at the side table, for the child with the dyed hair, for the 14-year-old who repacked grain wagons because the heavy stores were on top and the cart was going to tip. For her, the enough was this. She had been raised by a man who saved her. She had been raised beside a boy who shared her secret. She had grown up in the cold learning the specific, unglamorous, essential skills of keeping people alive. Not through fire, not through dragons, not through the blood of the dynasty. Through grain, through arithmetic, through the daily, invisible, thankless work of feeding people who didn't know her name and who ate the bread she organized without knowing who organized it. The dragon's daughter, raised by wolves, feeding the kingdom. One loaf at a time.